So again, Erin Moore, Associate Dean in the College of Design and Director of the School of Architecture and Environment at the University of Oregon. Welcome and good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers, Bill Leddy and Marsha Maytum, principals of Leddy Maytum Stacey Architects in San Francisco. Leddy Maytum Stacey is the recipient of the AIA 2017 Architecture Firm Award. And as you know, the Architecture Firm Award is the highest honor that the American Institute of Architects bestows on an architecture firm. It recognizes a practice that has consistently produced distinguished architecture for at least a decade, demonstrating a depth and breadth of work that has had a cumulative effect on the profession of architecture. And in receiving the award language reads that the firm principals began collaborating in 1983 with the belief that architecture is the synthesis of poetics, economics, technology, and the environment. Dedicated to addressing issues of resource depletion, climate change, historic preservation, and social equity, Leddy Maytum Stacey Architects and its leadership clearly demonstrate that architects can help their communities adapt to a complex and rapidly changing world. To that end, the firm's proficiency in diverse building types, from affordable housing to the adaptive reuse of historic structures, has been recognized with more than 140 design awards. They're one of only 3 firms to have ever received 8 AIA Committee on the Environment Top 10 Awards for Integrated Sustainable Design Excellence. A small, nimble firm comprising 21 dedicated designers who believe deeply in the transformative power of architecture. The firm's work demonstrates design with purpose as it develops model solutions to meet crucial challenges. I want to particularly recognize Bill and Marsha's demonstration of what it means to lead in architecture on the environment, for the environment. You're using your voices powerfully and you're being heard. Bill, in the Journal of the AIA California, advocating the business case for Zero Code California. Waiting until 2030 to decarbonize buildings in California is clearly waiting too long. Marsha, as this year's chair of the AIA Committee on the Environment, that is advocating now for making impact on architectural education and its advocacy for NAB criteria that address the role of the architect in climate action and the projected impacts. So I want to thank you for that important work, for the strong social and environmental ethics that underlie the work, and for the many extraordinary buildings that embody the strength of that ethic. And also for demonstrating, I think, so extraordinarily what it means to be a former ECS student of Professor John Reynolds. So thank you for being here. Please join me in welcoming Bill Leddy and Marsha Maytum.
Good morning. Thank you, Erin, for those kind comments. And thank you, John, for your inspiration and guidance when we were much, much younger and actually throughout our career. So we're delighted to be here, and thanks for the committee for inviting us this morning to speak to you a little bit about our work. There it is. And just to give you a little rundown on how we have this structured, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're all addressing, both in the academy and in our practice. We've just got 3 case studies to illustrate some of the things we're doing, and then some things that we think are important moving forward, both in the teaching realm and also in the practice of architecture. So, to begin with, this symposium is a great opportunity to think about how we can inspire the next generation and create the next leaders in addressing climate change and the challenges that we are facing in our world. And you all as educators have such an important role in making this happen. So we think that it's really important that architects are trained and believe in the power of the work that they do beyond the property line of the individual buildings that we design. So I think that's something that we want to make sure that we put forward. So, and this is a great opportunity for this next generation of architects. So you have an important job ahead to train them. So a little bit of background about our firm. We believe that everyone deserves great design. And we are, as Erin mentioned, we're a San Francisco-based firm. And Bill Leddy, Richard Stacey, and I have been working together since 1983, which is a really long But we decided to reformulate our firm in 2000 to focus strictly on projects in 3 areas. We work in supportive and affordable housing, which includes housing for the formerly homeless. We work in education because we think it's really important that the environments that people, students, faculty, and everyone who comes in contact can really model a hopeful future. And then we also work in community-based and for nonprofit organizations and social justice. These are some of the people that we serve. We really strive to serve the underserved because, as we said, we do believe that everyone deserves great design, and it's a social justice issue. We work with adults with autism, the formerly homeless, seniors living with HIV/AIDS, children with life-threatening diseases, and as I mentioned, also students in the next generation. And for us, this is really not just about form making, it's about designing with purpose. And that's what we have focused our practice on.
So we also talk about mission-driven design, and this idea that, as Marsha suggested, that architects and educators in architecture have a unique opportunity right now to be extremely impactful in how we prepare the next generation of architects, but also the next generation of the built environment for a changing world. You know, we've for a long time, I think this is something that maybe is baked into our DNA from our time at U of O. We felt that architects should strive for more than just form or being trendsetters, that we're also global citizens, and we have a responsibility to engage some of these challenges. So, you know, of course, the first one is designing for resilience, and this is something, as Marsha mentioned, we've been doing for a long time. I think, you know, obviously inspired by U of O and by John and others, that we sort of realized that architecture was really about everything, not just about 1 or 2 things. So we've been doing this for a while, and have continued to try to push our practice to engage with the changing landscape of our world as quickly as we can. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But equally important in our work is the idea of social design for social equity, and we see designing for climate and designing for social equity as being inextricably entwined, because, you know, we feel like it's not just the climate that's changing. The whole world is changing, of course, around us, with rapidly advancing climate change, homelessness, disability rights, aging with dignity. The fact that we're seeing now in California, we're seeing, you know, millions of people without power for days on end because the utility just decided that they're gonna not risk any wildfires, so they're just gonna turn everyone's power off. So I think, you know, climate change, of course, is here, and we have a lot of work to do to deal with that. This is something, of course, we've all been talking about for quite a while. This is we like to show this slide from Metropolis back in 2003, and where Ed Mazzaria, you know, first introduced "It's the Architecture, Stupid," and of course we all are familiar with this diagram. The fact that you know, we have the next arguably 10 years to 30 years is key to help turn things around, and that's I think exacerbated by the fact, as Ed likes to point out, that during that same period of time, roughly, the number of built buildings in the world is going to double. So 230 billion square meters of construction is predicted to be happening between the next 50 to 60 years, and 40% of that in the next 15 years. So there's a sort of a double-edged component to that. On one side, we can say, okay, we have this great opportunity to get it right this time around. On the other hand, we say, we can say, wow, that's making a hard job even harder. How do we manage the carbon emissions of doubling the amount of construction in the world during this critical period of time that we have to be driving emissions down? So the good news is, however, that that attitudes are slowly, actually now quickly, changing.
Right. So now comes after the moment of despair of the daunting challenge we have ahead. I think Bill and I have been working over the last several years, and sometimes it feels a bit like a Sisyphusian effort, just pushing the AIA up the hill. But I just want to report to the group that we do seem to be at a tipping point in a number of areas, and specifically at the American Institute of Architects. It's been pretty remarkable what's happened in the last few months. So I thought I would share that just to give people a bit of hope that the actions of individuals have really made a difference, and that collectively all our voices are being heard and change is happening. So the first change happened a year and a half ago at the AIA, when the canon, our professional canon by the AIA, was changed to, for the first time, include that we have a responsibility to address the environment in our work, and a responsibility to tell our clients about that. So I think that went under the radar for a lot of people. People didn't know that that change happened in the canon of what it is to be an architect. So to me, that was the first big change that happened. And then many of you know that this last year has been a very exciting time. Several members took to the floor at the convention in Las Vegas. I don't know if any of you were there. And we decided that we really needed to push for urgent action by the AIA. And we were inspired by Bob Berkebile and Ed Mazaria, who did a similar thing 30 years ago when they stormed the floor at an AIA convention with a resolution to form the Committee on the Environment, which we are now celebrating our 30th year coming up. So inspired by that, we took to the floor for this resolution on urgent climate action. 3 simple requests from the AIA to declare this, make it public that it's an urgent climate imperative, and then make a commitment to transform day-to-day practice throughout the Institute and every architect, and then finally really make it in alignment with the messaging and advocacy efforts. So those were our 3 asks. And it was overwhelmingly passed on the floor. We always wonder who those 28 people were.
Yeah, we're still looking for them.
Yeah, Bill was stalking them on the floor. But it was a triumphant moment.
Who are these people?
Yeah. It was ironic it was in Las Vegas, but it was incredibly empowering for everybody there. So that happened in June. And I'm happy to report that I made the presentation to the board in September, where it was unanimously ratified. And then also at the same meeting, the AIA unanimously approved the adoption of the Code Top 10 measures into what we're now calling the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. So this is huge stuff, all within a matter of months. And we'll go into more detail about this later on. But Bill and I recently were at a carbon conference in Chicago that Architecture 2030 put forward. And so Ed allows me to share these slides in my talks now, which are great. I think it's important to look at the challenge that we have ahead, but reflect back on our history so that to find guidance. So Ed's point was that we have 30 years to correct and change the course of how we build our world. But he points to this. Look at what happened in 30 years. From 1925 to 1955, we basically rebuilt the whole, a good portion of the world. And in 25, it was, masonry, load-bearing walls. And then from 1925 to 1955, we completely transformed the way we built with steel and concrete. We transformed the way we do transportation with air travel and all kinds of other things. We basically rebuilt our world in 30 years. And what did we do that with? T-squares and slide rules. So look what we did with those tools at hand. We rebuilt the world and the vision of the world. And so we have 30 years again. But think of the tools we have at our disposal. We can instantly connect around the world to the brightest minds in a nanosecond. We have all the power of computing. We have all this knowledge. So I personally took this to be a very optimistic statement that we have 30 years and we can do this.
So I think fundamentally what we're looking at really, and the people in this room are looking at is rapidly transforming our design culture globally to rethink what design excellence really is, what the job of architecture really is, and to acknowledge that that really in the 21st century, architecture has a bigger job to do. It has to embrace the natural world and promote a just and regenerative future for everyone. I think the drive to zero carbon is going to be a huge challenge, but at the same time, I think if we can sort of unleash the creativity of millions of people across the country, your students included, and young professionals included, then we can achieve that in this next 30 years. So we'd like to talk about two parts of this. I think there's the sort of integrated values, integrated practice, sort of how we approach thinking about architecture in our practice, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of going beyond our practice in a minute. I think that all of this, of course, is very complicated, and sometimes it's hard to even get your head wrapped around all the things that have to change and how quickly it all has to change. But I think what we've realized is that a guiding principle for us is that architecture is essentially a values proposition. That essentially our buildings reflect the values of our society, and so we have strived to change the values of our practice to think more about these things broadly, what we refer to as beyond the property line. And I think that we in the studio and in the office as well, we want to advance the idea that that architecture isn't just about one or two things. It's about everything. It's about community outreach and carbon capture, building art, building science, public policy and politics. But it's also about marrying poetry and performance, and it's all about all of those things. And so trying to get our young architects and our students to understand that and grasp that and sort of not feel overwhelmed by that is part of what we try to do in our practice and when we teach.
So a little bit about how our studio is set up. We have always had a very open and transparent office structure, and we take our role as mentor and training ground for the next generation seriously. We really do think of our practice as a teaching practice, and we're happy to see where all of our graduates from our studio have ended up, many here in Portland, because it's so expensive to live in San Francisco. So we often think of ourselves as a farm team, creating this next generation of architects. So the work that you all start in school, we think it's really important for practices to take our role as that next step in the development of a well-rounded architect very seriously. So our studio has really focused not only on the technical side of making great architects in terms of knowing how to put a building together, but we also want to make sure that we are encouraging our young architects to think of themselves as global citizens and really making them empowered to make a difference in our community. This is really based upon transparency of purpose, process, and practice is stated there in action. So we, you know, it's a non-hierarchical office, big open studio. Everybody hears everybody's conversation. We have no private offices at all. And that's really, that osmosis learning we think is really important. We also think it's really important to get people on the job site. So that's something that we really spend a lot of time to make sure that people really understand the lines that they draw, you know, what it means to be in the field. And we take particular care in making sure that the women in our office, which I think right now we're over 50% women, and we have a, I think 33% range of diversity in our office. So, you know, personally for me, I'm always helping to train women how to be effective in the job site, the construction site. Bill's laughing. I do a good job.
Marsha has a famous flare of the nostril that makes grown men weep.
Yeah, it's really good. It's special. I pass this on.
All the young women in our office go, how does she do that? Well, she'll give lessons.
I teach them. So I think that all of these things are really important, an important part and important responsibility of leaders in firms, and then mentoring on down. So we have a robust mentoring program within our office, pairing people at different levels, inside of teams and outside of teams, to help, again, really work hard at creating a great next generation of architects. So looking inward, we have always been focused on trying, as Bill said, marrying poetry and pragmatism, embedding wise uses of resources, trying to find the best tools that we have at our disposal as a small firm. We don't have a sustainability department. We don't have a whole fleet of people doing research. We do it more as a guerrilla activity on each job, and try to bring that in and train people on teams so that we all are advocates for sustainable design and high performance on every project.
Many large firms, as you probably know, have somebody whose title is Sustainability Officer. What is that? Do you get a badge?
We want the medal. So we do have a young woman who has a dual degree in building science and a master's in architecture from UC Berkeley, which we're really delighted that Gwen Fuertes is in our team as an associate, and she's the current chair of the 2030 group with the AIA. So we have a lot of really inspiring young architects in our office, and so we're really thrilled to have those resources on all of our projects. So a little bit about, you know, these are the things that we all think about when we make buildings, and we thought we'd share a few of the tools that we use. The AIA 2030 Challenge, I'm sure all of you know about this, is that correct? Yes, lots of shaking of heads. So it's a really great program, again, inspired by Ed Mazaria long ago, and it's a really important tool for all of us to be clear with ourselves. How are we doing in getting to this goal of zero carbon? And if we don't share what we're doing, if we're not honest and truthful about what we're doing, and we don't mark our progress, we're going to be in deep trouble. So we are big supporters and early signers of the 2030 commitment. And as you can see, this is from the report that just came out maybe a month ago, I think, from the AIA. You can get it online on the AIA website. And it's a snapshot of how our profession is doing in reaching the 2030 commitment. And you can see we're kind of below that yellow line nationwide. So I think the urgency and the imperative to figure out how we can transform practice to move those numbers up is really important. So we do, as you're required with the 2030 commitment, we're always monitoring our projects. And we've got some, of course, really good ones up here. But then, as we mentioned, the three areas of our work, affordable supportive housing, education, and community-based projects, the housing projects are super hard, and particularly in a dense area like San Francisco, where, you know, we just don't have a lot of, our buildings are multi-story, we don't have a lot of roof area for solar.
And they're low-income affordable housing projects, which
Yeah, one thing we forgot to mention is all of our projects are on incredibly tight budgets. And so we, really work it to get the most we can possibly in. But so we're busy trying to move our numbers up, and as you can see, we're going in the right direction, and we continue on every job to try to push that. Did you have anything else to say about 2030? Okay. So the second tool that we think is really, really powerful is what we're now calling the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. And it is based upon the 10 measures that we're all very familiar with from the Committee on the Environment, the Code Top 10. And I think this is a powerful tool not just for students, not just for practitioners, but also for our clients and our communities. It's a really clear and easy way to highlight that design isn't just about one thing. It really, to be successful, needs to be about all of these things. And measure number one about integration is the most important measure, that it really needs to be a holistic, integrated approach. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but we think that's really important. So I'm not going to go into huge detail on each one of these, because I'm sure you're familiar with them. But it's just a really great way to communicate about just the depth and range of things we need to think about as architects. And we need to find this way to communicate that to our clients and to our community members, that what we do as architects is really, really important. So first and foremost, that we are an integrated approach to design, marrying this idea of performance, beauty, and making great places for our community. Engagement with community, being respectful and bringing them into the process is really, really important. Design for ecology. Design for water, a huge issue in California, not so much up here. But this is going to be an important issue across the globe in many, many areas. Design for economy is very important, and if you cannot make the business case for this, then we're not going to be successful. So that's really an essential part of design excellence. Design for energy, we've all spent a lot of time over the last many decades thinking about energy, but that's certainly one important part. Design for wellness, I think, is something that we really need to think much more about. That's equally important to energy efficiency. Making healthy environments for everyone. We know that the public health issues that we have with asthma in underserved neighborhoods, there are just so many issues that we as architects need to really be thinking about as we design. Design for resources, carbon is the big item in the room right now. We need to really be thinking about both our procurement, what we're doing with the existing resources around us, and how we select and make manufacturers be transparent about what it is we are putting in this next cycle of buildings as we rebuild the world again in the next 20 to 30 years. Design for change is a huge issue. Resilience is going to be more and more in the forefront in our work and in our communities. And how can we as architects design for change? Looking at the resources around us, thinking about how they can be repurposed, thinking about how we can make our communities work better. And finally, measure 10 is design for discovery. And this is about sharing what we do. This is about going back and tracking what we've done. How is it really working? How can we learn from what we've done? How can we exchange and make that transparent to everybody? And again, moving our profession forward in reaching the goals that we need to achieve in a very short period of time. So those are the 10 measures. And one of the things that we've done at the Committee on the Environment is create this amazing toolkit. And how many people have roamed around on the toolkit? Anybody? Just a couple people. So I urge you to check it out. It's a really great tool, as the name implies. And you can go deep into each one of the measures, and there's a companion super spreadsheet, which I think would be very valuable in the classroom for having the students have a way to quickly, test, choices they make, what kind of impact is it going to have on the performance of their building. So it's a very powerful toolkit, which was done by a volunteer effort by Corey Squire and Helena Zambrano. Coat volunteers created this whole spreadsheet. So as you dial into, as you click on the website into the measures, say this one is about, I think, community. There are different links, so you can dial into this and get best practices, a really quick snapshot of a curated approach to best practices. And then there's another click, and you can zoom in on what are the highest impact items you can do in each one of the measures. For example, if you have a client with very limited means, this is an easy way to check in and think, well, if I could only do one thing, what would be the most impactful thing to do on this project? So that's a great resource. And then the third tab is a curated, crowdsourced, updated resource database for everybody. The idea is this wants to be used by everybody all around the country and hopefully beyond. And so you in your studios, it's really hard to keep up with all the things that are being developed. And so this is a really great way for you and your students to be able to see what latest research or latest articles, and have a crowdsourced, curated collection of information that you know is solid. And then finally, case study projects. The Code Top 10 has been around for over 25 years now, so we have over 250 projects all around the country that you can dial into deeply to find out how they've done it in other parts of the country, different building types, what performance strategies have they used. So it's a very powerful tool.
So of course we use a variety of other tools as they are evolving and trying to get reliable early concept energy and daylight modeling going at the very beginning of the projects, and also doing more and more sort of post-occupancy work. I'll talk about that more in a minute, but going around and really looking at the buildings with infrared cameras and so forth to make sure that we can understand where the leaks are happening. This is one of our housing projects. You'll see in a minute. And I think another thing that we do is, because we occasionally have a chance to do kind of the first of projects, a large disability center in Berkeley, housing for a new model for housing adults with autism and so forth, is that whereas large firms often have separate R&D departments, our firm really can't manage that, but we can manage doing project-based research, and so we find that to be just another opportunity to learn and have our young architects engage with doing basic research and making sure that we're achieving best practices in that regard. The last point I wanted to make was this idea of post-occupancy evaluation. Again, I think this is something that has so far, I think, been largely, when it has been done, has been largely the realm of large firms who have the resources to do it. Some manage actually even to get paid for it, which is pretty remarkable.
Miracle.
We haven't been able to do that yet. But so we're trying to figure out how can a smaller firm do this in a very simple way, using a variety of online tools and other resources that are available, and doing kind of Survey Monkey, simple kind of user surveys. So it's not a full-on, all-out kind of graduate thesis level POE, but it's enough to get us the information that we need to understand how things are really working. So we'd like to talk about three real quick case studies in that regard. I think the first one is the Jacobs Institute for Design Innovation at UC Berkeley, which is a true innovation hub for the entire university. It was sponsored by the engineering department, but students from all over the campus come here. It's right at the edge of campus. We talked about it early in design as being kind of a beacon that attracted students, but also from around the campus, but also expressed to the outward community the values of the institution, the values of the Department of Engineering, and here it is. There up on the upper side here, right up here, literally at the edge of campus, sort of facing out into the community. So we had to make a building that really would draw people from the entire campus, and get them excited about essentially designing the future. This is a building that is literally built on a former volleyball court. And also, they didn't manage to mention to us after we got the job, until sometime after we got the job, that it actually overhangs an existing basement right here. So that was an extra structural challenge. But again, we applied our usual kind of integrated approach to the project, making big, light, airy, flexible environments. This building handles 3,000 students a term going through here, and something like 35 separate clubs that are involved in some sort of interdisciplinary innovation effort. It has big lofty spaces, lots of collaboration environments, places where we talk a lot about sort of offering opportunities for collaborative collisions on stairs and other lounges and so forth. But our post-occupancy study, this was really great because we could actually enlist some of the students, and the faculty was very supportive of this as well. So oftentimes our nonprofit clients are less interested in that, but these folks were all over it. So this was a LEED Platinum building, and I think the idea was to sort of really see, of course, how it was functioning. And one thing that we figured out, which was very pleasing, was the fact that whereas the energy models showed this building working about 90% below baseline, we ended up in actual electricity use 94% below baseline, and we tried to convince the university that we only have 6% to go. Can we just get that 6%? Well, unfortunately, there wasn't funding for that, but at least the students can know that they can engage with this building, and it's actually using a really low amount of energy, despite all of the additional equipment that's now in the building. You can see here that even though the energy use is actually higher than was anticipated, I think our PV production is actually also higher than was anticipated. They also, as clients often do, they also managed to increase the sizes of labs in the building and beyond what we anticipated. So we even had a higher energy load from that perspective as well. So 230% increase in lab space over what was modeled. Daylighting, we went back into the building and using student help. We actually went through and did a post-occupancy daylight study evaluation and found that everything was working just as expected. We did some post-occupancy indoor air quality measurements because there are laser cutters and those kinds of things, 3D printers and so forth, and found that generally speaking, we were in pretty good shape with all that in terms of indoor air quality. So I think at the end of the day, the lessons learned from this project were that first of all, students are dying to work with each other to envision a new way of doing things. We have folks from the engineering school and from the architecture school and from English and history departments working together, and
the linguistics
working together to solve a whole variety of problems that they've identified. And you know, the building strives to be very transparent. You can see that the campus-facing side of the building is also facing south, but it also, we try to balance daylight control with transparency, so people can really see the sort of hive of activity that's happening inside the building. And then of course it's this whole question of PVs and what to do with them, right? Do you make them go away, or do you actually try to celebrate them? In this case, we saw an opportunity to provide a structural gesture or a sculptural gesture, reaching up to the north and kind of declaring more aggressively the aspirations of the building and the aspirations of the campus.
So switching project types. So this is, I'm going to share just a few slides about one of our recent projects dealing with the issue of homelessness. So over the last 15 years, we've had the opportunity to work with the city on a number of projects, and we're continuing to do that. This is the Renee Kazanov housing project, and it's right off the Bay Bridge, and it was a site that the city owned, and they gave this to a nonprofit developer, which we're very fortunate in San Francisco, much like Portland, to have a great group of nonprofit housing developers. So this is over 100 units of studio apartments for the formerly homeless with on-site support services. Again, I know the city of Portland also has many projects following the same model. This is a really high-performing building. This is equivalent of a LEED Platinum, but we use the Greenpoint system, which is a system we use in California. But you can see it's at a very prominent city site right as you enter the downtown area in the Transbay. Excuse me. And the city, we think, is a great statement that not hiding this issue of homelessness, but providing dignified housing and addressing this problem right prominently as you enter the city. And all of those high-rise condos all around are looking down on a roof that is generating all the hot water, solar hot water, and solar PV. So again, and making a very strong announcement both about the social values and the energy values of the city of San Francisco. So, but it's about putting lives back together. This idea of having the embedded social services on site so that it's destigmatized, that everyone flows this is what we call the main street facing the sunny courtyard. Everybody walks along and sees the training rooms and the social worker rooms and all of these social services that are available to the residents. So that's just part of everyday life, and they can see all the other people in their community also taking advantage of these services. On the plans on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see this is the main entry. Everybody has to walk along that main street to get to the elevators. So it's just part of everyday life for the group of individuals that are living in this building. As we mentioned, all of our projects are with very limited budgets, so we try to make all of our design moves extremely efficient and solve. Oh, thank you so much, Allison. Appreciate that. Thank you. Simple double-loaded corridor, but having light at the end of the corridor is absolutely essential, connecting to, of course, daylight, but also views of the city. And it makes for a very pleasant environment for the individuals. Again, a whole host of sustainable strategies are integrated, including stormwater management through the use of green roofs. This is a rain screen system. We are able to, because this is a long-term owner, we did the cost analysis and were able to convince them to use a Swiss Pearl system, which they'll never have to repaint in the future. So that was a real win for the project. And here's just a snapshot of some of the sustainable strategies that we used. One thing I'd like to mention in terms of resilience that's unique about this project, since this is a city piece of property, they wanted to make sure that we designed this to a higher level of structural safety. And so this will be, we worked with our structural engineer to come up with a more robust vertical structural shear system, so that this will be an essential, not essential service element, but at least the city knows that it will be standing and can be a place that can help if we have another earthquake in San Francisco, which we just did last week. But mostly it's a great place for the residents to put their lives back together, and it's seamlessly integrated into this new neighborhood. There's a fancy chocolate shop and a Vietnamese sandwich shop. You would never know that there are 100 people rebuilding their lives and now have a permanent home in downtown San Francisco that were formerly on the street. So I think this is just another example of how architecture can make a positive impact in our community. So the last project we're going to show is another thread of our work, which is adaptive reuse, which we think is really important. Again, looking at the resources around us in our communities and thinking about how they can be put to good use for the next generations. So this is at Fort Mason on the edge of the bay in San Francisco, which was an old Army base, and transformed in the 1970s to one of the first nonprofit community-based art center. So the building has incredible Army history. It was built in 1905 and served all the way through to the 1960s. The entire Pacific Theater was, all the supplies and soldiers came out of this part of Fort Mason. So we like to think not only of this project as having important embodied carbon in the building, but it also has a really important embodied cultural, is an important embodied cultural resource for our country. So this, our challenge with this historic adaptive reuse, which is a national landmark, did use historic tax credits, was to convince them that we wanted to transform what had been an Army supply warehouse into a new warehouse for artists for the San Francisco Art Institute. And so our line of reasoning was, well, we're just taking the supplies for World War II that were housed in this building and making it a space for artists. And we were successful in our line of reasoning and got the tax credits, and were able to negotiate with them on how to take this really valuable resource with the incredible bones and structure of this industrial steel frame and abundant natural daylight, and carefully insert 2 new mezzanines of artist studios, a media theater, a workshop, and all the things that the students needed to make this a thriving new arts environment. So this is also a real high-performing project. We were able to negotiate getting one of the largest PV arrays on a national landmark, a 255 kilowatt array on the roof of this over 400-foot long pier on the bay. But one of the challenges was what to do with the slab. And so the detail here you can see on the right-hand side, it is floating over the bay. There's no thermal separation from this slab over the bay. So our challenge was to convince our client that A, we would put a radiant slab capping over the original warehouse slab for heating, so we'd just be heating the 8-foot area where the people were. But we also needed to protect just losing, basically heating the bay. So we had to convince them to spend the money on putting in the rigid insulation, which was essential to stop us from the radiant slab heating the bay below us. So we did a cost-benefit analysis and also ran this very simple therm model that showed that if we didn't put that radiant heating in, or excuse me, the insulation in with the radiant heating, that we would not achieve a comfortable level of heating for the users of the building. So this simple little free tool allowed us to get 450 feet long of rigid insulation across the whole pier. So it was a great strategy. In terms of embodied carbon and wise use of resources, I think adaptive reuse projects like this are really important examples to share with your students. And also the way that we integrate new materials, again, picking materials that have good quality in terms of indoor air quality and all of those things, but also making sure that the systems we pick are doing more than one thing at a time. So acoustics was a big issue, and so we came up with a very inexpensive and simple strategy of putting acoustic panels on the ceiling, but our new slab on the mezzanines, which you can see here, we used a product which had the insulation, acoustic insulation included in the structural slab component. So again, one material, we solved multiple issues, and we were able to eliminate having 2 layers of material and different products in the space. And the result is a very clean and efficient insertion of the new program. We also did daylighting analysis similar to what we did on Jacobs, post-occupancy, to make sure that the daylighting was working well for the artists. And ultimately, it's been transformed into a space that's a dynamic art school and a really great part of the public domain now at Fort Mason for the whole city of San Francisco, and it sits within the national park of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So I think it's a really important lesson in looking around at the resources in our communities and thinking about how we can take not only the embodied carbon of those existing buildings and keeping that and reusing it, but also keeping the embodied cultural stories in our communities.
So to wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about, looking outward, so how can we all be citizen architects and look beyond our work and try to help shift thinking and the economy and all the other aspects we have to shift in the next 10 to 30 years. So how do you redefine design excellence for a carbon positive world? And this is a good description here, holistic and integrated approach to achieve high performing, equitable, and beautiful buildings. One way to do that, very powerful way, architects love awards, right? And in fact, we've always felt that it's the most powerful outward face of the Institute and of the profession to show the community beyond what great architecture really is and what it really means to society. Interestingly, the Code Top 10 Awards, I was chair in 2013 of the National Code Top 10 Awards has been the most popular awards program in the AIA forever, outstripping all of the honors awards programs put together. So in 2012, we started an initiative to try to get narratives, sustainability narratives and metrics included as part of the submission to the National Honor Awards. Other communities, prominent among them, Portland and Seattle, have been pushing this, and San Francisco pushing this for many years as well. And then finally, it took a couple of tries to convince the board that this was actually meaningful. And finally, in 2013, that happened. And then this year, there's been another big leap, finally, in moving things forward as well. So Marsha's going to talk about that.
So we're at a national level, we're working on this awards alignment. So beyond just making sure that we honor what we value and that every project that the Institute awards needs to reflect sustainable design and high performance. We also want to collect the data. Like, data is power. And so if all across the country through every awards project or program, we have a shared set of data points that we collect, then we can measure what we're doing and see how we're progressing. So we think this is a really important development, and the data from that spreadsheet gets turned into this really handy dandy spider graph. And so it's an easy way for us to communicate how all of our projects are going to be, how they are doing in terms of the 10 measures. So we think this is a really exciting development in how we as a profession can collect data on what we do, monitor our progress, and then most importantly, really honor what we value, what we say we value.
Another initiative that we helped get started was to engage the next generation of students is the AIA Top 10 for Students Award, and this is something that Allison Kwok played a pivotal role in. Thank you, Allison. It's now attracting 60 universities from around the country and actually into Canada, and I think we had a few from South America as well the last couple of years. So I think this acknowledges the idea that many universities, I'm sure not any of the universities represented here, but some universities still have a big gulf between what design excellence means and performance, and this whole notion that they're two separate silos. And so this is an idea to try to get this going. We've actually had the honor and pleasure of teaching our own 2 studios of ourselves, one at University of Oregon a few years back, and then last spring at University of California, based around the Top 10 for Students Award. This is a project from one of the teams that was a site on the bay at Tiburon for a new ocean and estuary science center. Then a variety of other winning projects, and I think this is we hope it will continue to be attract universities and help to change cultures within those universities.
So today, as we speak, NAB is meeting about the accreditation process. So I'm sure you guys are fully up to speed on all of those things, but we are really at an important moment to make sure that sustainability really is embedded in the curriculum across the country and that it is a part of the accreditation rules. I'm singing to the choir here, I'm sure. But I just want to point out that the comments we have until November 22nd, I believe it is. So I urge everybody to make your comments. The Committee on the Environment has made a strong memo to NAB, but I think it's really the schools that need to put pressure. So today, Jane Frederick, the incoming AIA president, is making a big pitch to the NAB to really strengthen the accreditation requirements. So I urge you all to do that and to make comments.
But fundamentally for us, really, it comes down to changing the code. I think those of us who've been doing this for a while are tired of convincing people that it's the right thing to do, or it's the smart thing to do, or it's the cheap thing to do. Whatever it is, time is too short for that. So we've fully embraced Architecture 2030's Zero Code as something to advocate in California. Our hope, our thinking in California is that at this point, according to a lot of folks who are dealing with this issue internationally, that China, India, and the EU are all waiting to see what California does around carbon reduction in the built environment. So we're doing a hard court press on the governor at AI California Council. We're doing a hard court press to try to get the Zero Code adopted immediately as a REACH code within the Cal Green code in California, and then by 2022 make it a law. So instead of waiting to 2030, which is now the current goal of making commercial buildings net zero carbon, we want to move that up to 2022. And our feeling is that by that point, 3 things will happen. First thing that will happen is, again, we will stop making this a point of discussion with clients. They'll have to do it. It'll unleash the creativity of the entire profession, so we don't have people dragging their feet anymore. And it will also unleash innovation. And we hope as soon as there's a big market that is required for this or is available for this, it will help to continue to drive the cost of renewables, invent new materials that are low carbon, and sort of unleash the innovation of the entire country around this. So this is something that we're very passionate about trying to get done in the next few years.
So just to wrap up, you as educators have such an important role in all of this, and we think that this is really a time of opportunity, certainly a challenge, but you really are the key to helping to create the next generation of leaders, and architects really do have an extremely important role that we can play in helping to solve these issues.
I'd like to end with a piece that came out right after the IPCC report, now almost exactly a year ago. It was an op-ed in the New York Times that I always thought captures the sort of spirit of the times. Solving climate change presents humanity with the opportunity to save civilization from collapse and create aspects of what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community. The work would endow our lives with some of the oldest and most numinous aspirations of humankind: leading a good life, treating our neighbors well, imbuing our short existence with timeless ideas like grace, dignity, respect, tolerance, and love. The climate struggle embodies the essence of what it means to be human, which is that we strive for the divine. So we can't think of a better description of what architects and architecture education has always strived for, and thank you very much.
Looks like we have 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes for questions. Oh, great. Okay, I'm silenced now. Uh-oh, we rendered them speechless. Okay, great.
Sharon.
Marsha, you mentioned that you have a robust mentoring program in your office. I'm wondering, how formalized is that, and is it something that gets assigned or happens organically?
No, it is assigned. In our office, we do every year at the end of our fiscal year, we meet with every single person in the office at one time, and every year we refresh the assignments of who is mentoring which person in the office. And so during the year, during the next calendar year, they're supposed to go out for coffee, go out for lunch, but there is a formal assignment that takes place both up and down the experience of the people in the office. So within our kind of scrappy firm, we try to be organized, but it is a formal process.
Is there a metric? Is there, like, this year I want to be mentored by this person and this is my goal at the end of the time, or is it more informal than that?
It's somewhat informal, but there are goals, like what professional development do you want to try to achieve? What do you think your skill set is that you need to strengthen, in just getting a two-way feedback loop?
Thank you for your work and for the inspiration. I have a question. You showed a slide much earlier on in the presentation about you're tracking your own work in relation to, I believe it was 2030.
Right.
So you're always aspiring to get to 100%, et cetera. If you are struggling with some of those projects with all of your expertise and passion, I guess what I'm asking is a couple things. Is what are you doing? What more can you do? And what are you trying to do? And maybe that'll help the rest of us.
Change the codes. Pretty easy. I think the chart that we showed, I think it's interesting that most of the bubbles below the line are the affordable housing projects that we do, and we've talked for a long time about, well, maybe we're thinking too narrowly also about embodied carbon. We should be thinking also about the fact that all of these projects are projects that are transit-oriented and are densifying the city and doing all these other things. And so I think thinking more broadly about that is something, at the very least, might make us feel a little better about our struggles. The costs, I was telling someone earlier that the construction costs in San Francisco have now ascended to the highest in the world. We passed Tokyo last two or 3 months ago. So a lot of our affordable housing projects, even though they are going to be long-term owners and will reap economic benefits, they are now peeling off PV panels and other sustainable strategies on the projects. because they can't afford the first cost. So that's why we think, well, okay, there's one solution to that, change the code. And so that's what we're hoping to do.
Municipalities also have a really important role to play. The electrification that's happening in California it's taking on, like, I guess I can't say wildfire anymore. But it's amazing how quickly, again, we just seem to be at this tipping point. 60 municipalities across the state have said electrification, there's going to be no more natural gas on site. So that's powerful.
Yeah.